The cold metal floor of Unity Station felt strange under Jake Morrison's boots. He had been walking these corridors for 3 days now, waiting for the Galactic Council to make their final decision. The station floated in neutral space, far from any sun or planet. It was built by aliens who valued order above all else. And right now, that order was crushing humanity. Jake looked out the massive window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, Earth hung in the darkness, waiting to hear if its people would become slaves or remain free. The thought made his jaw tighten. He was a captain in the Earth Defense Fleet, and he had seen combat before. But this enemy could not be fought with weapons. This enemy used laws and contracts and debts. 3 months ago, the colony ship, Frontier Dawn, had suffered a catastrophic failure near the ice moon of Kelros 9. The engines died, life support began failing, and 3,000 human colonists faced certain death in the frozen void. The Vryn Combine had picked up their distress signal and responded. They saved every single human life, bringing massive rescue ships and medical facilities. Then they presented the bill. 30 billion credits for the rescue operation. The Galactic Council backed the Vryn claim, stating that all debts must be honored under Council law. Humanity had 10 years to pay, or Earth and all its colonies would be seized as payment. The interest rate was set at 12% annually, compounding. Every economist on Earth had run the numbers, and the conclusion was always the same. It was impossible to pay. Jake heard footsteps behind him and turned. Amy Chen approached, her navigator uniform crisp despite the long days of waiting. She was young, barely 26, but she could plot jump coordinates faster than the ship's computer. Her dark eyes showed the same worry Jake felt. "They are calling us in," Amy said quietly. "The Council is ready to announce their decision. On beer. And a decision. And a decision." Jake nodded and followed her through the winding corridors. Other species moved past them, beings of every shape and size. The tall, crystalline Vex, who communicated through light pulses, the flowing, water-like Aquith who needed special suits to maintain their form, the massive Thuron, with their 6 legs and armor-plated bodies. All of them were part of the Council's grand civilization, and all of them followed the Council's rules. The Council chamber was enormous, built to accommodate hundreds of different species. Jake and Amy took their place in the human delegation area, a small platform near the back. Above them, the Council members sat in their elevated positions, looking down on those who came seeking judgment. The head counselor was a Vryn named Kelthros. His species looked almost insect-like, with smooth gray skin and large black eyes. He spoke in the common trade language, and his voice carried through the chamber with artificial amplification. "We have reviewed the human petition to reduce or eliminate the debt owed to the Vryn Combine," Kelthros began. "We have examined the evidence presented by the human delegation. We have considered the economic circumstances of the species known as humanity." Well, Jake felt his fists clench. He knew what was coming. "The Council finds no grounds to reduce the debt," Kelthros continued. "The rescue operation was conducted in good faith, and the costs were legitimate. Humanity has 10 standard years to repay the full amount of 30 billion credits, plus interest. Failure to do so will result in the seizure of Earth and all human-controlled territories as per Council law." The words hit like a physical blow. Around the chamber, alien delegates murmured among themselves. Some seemed sympathetic, but most appeared indifferent. To them, this was just another business matter, another enforcement of the rules that kept their civilization functioning. Jake stood and requested permission to speak. Kelthros granted it, with a dismissive wave. "The amount is impossible to pay," Jake said, his voice steady despite his anger. "You know this. The Vryn know this. This is not about debt. This is about taking our worlds." Kelthros's expression did not change. "The Council does not concern itself with difficulty, only with law. You have 10 years, Captain Morrison. I suggest you use them wisely." The session ended, and Jake walked out of the chamber, feeling the weight of billions of people on his shoulders. Amy walked beside him, silent but supportive. They made their way back to their quarters, where the rest of Jake's team was waiting. Dan Brooks sat cleaning his rifle, even though weapons were technically prohibited on Unity Station. He was a sergeant, a combat veteran with scars on his face and arms that told stories of battles fought in the outer colonies. He looked up as Jake entered. "Well?" Dan asked. "We have 10 years to do the impossible," Jake replied. The fourth member of their team, Dr. Lisa Grant, looked up from her data tablet. She was a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life forms and understood how different species functioned. Her red hair was tied back, and her green eyes showed quick intelligence. "I have been reviewing something interesting," Lisa said. "During our time here, I have been scanning the Council's public databases. They have records of resource deposits across the galaxy, including regions they classify as dead zones." "Dead zones?" Amy asked. "Regions of space that are too dangerous for most species to enter," Lisa explained. "Places with extreme radiation, crushing gravity, violent stellar activity. The Council has mapped these areas but declared them off-limits because the cost of extraction would exceed the value of the resources." Jake felt something stir in his chest. Hope, maybe, or perhaps just the recognition of an opportunity. "But humans are different," Jake said slowly. "We come from Earth," Lisa nodded. "Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. Only 0.03% of known planets have conditions as hostile as Earth. High gravity, intense radiation from the sun, extreme weather, aggressive predators, toxic atmosphere during certain geological periods. Humans evolved to survive conditions that would kill most Council species in minutes." Dan set down his rifle, interested now. "So these dead zones that they cannot touch, we might be able to work them?" "More than that," Lisa said, her excitement growing. "I ran calculations based on human physiological tolerances. We could operate in environments that even protected Council workers cannot access. The resources in just one of these zones could be worth billions." Jake felt the plan forming in his mind. It was dangerous, maybe suicidal, but it was a chance. Humanity had always been good at taking chances. "We need a ship," Jake said. "Something tough." Built the cold metal floor of Unity Station felt strange under Jake Morrison's boots. He had been walking these corridors for 3 days now, waiting for the Galactic Council to make their final decision. The station floated in neutral space, far from any sun or planet. It was built by aliens who valued order above all else, and right now, that order was crushing humanity. Jake looked out the massive window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, Earth hung in the darkness, waiting to hear if its people would become slaves or remain free. The thought made his jaw tighten. He was a captain in the Earth Defense Fleet, and he had seen combat before. But this enemy could not be fought with weapons. This enemy used laws and contracts and debts. 3 months ago, the colony ship Frontier Dawn had suffered a catastrophic failure near the ice moon of Kelros 9. The engines died, life support began failing, and 3,000 human colonists faced certain death in the frozen void. The Vryn Combine had picked up their distress signal and responded. They saved every single human life, bringing massive rescue ships and medical facilities. Then they presented the bill, 30 billion credits, for the rescue operation. The Galactic Council backed the Vryn claim, stating that all debts must be honored under Council law. Humanity had 10 years to pay, or Earth and all its colonies would be seized as payment. The interest rate was set at 12% annually, compounding. Every economist on Earth had run the numbers, and the conclusion was always the same. It was impossible to pay. Jake heard footsteps behind him and turned. Amy Chen approached, her navigator uniform crisp despite the long days of waiting. She was young, barely 26, but she could plot jump coordinates faster than the ship's computer. Her dark eyes showed the same worry Jake felt. "They are calling us in," Amy said quietly. The council is ready to announce their decision. Jake nodded and followed her through the winding corridors. Other species moved past them, beings of every shape and size. The tall, crystalline Vex, who communicated through light pulses, the flowing, water-like Aquith, who needed special suits to maintain their form. The massive Thuron, with their 6 legs and armor-plated bodies. All of them were part of the Council's grand civilization, and all of them followed the Council's rules. The Council chamber was enormous, built to accommodate hundreds of different species. Jake and Amy took their place in the human delegation area, a small platform near the back. Above them, the Council members sat in their elevated positions, looking down on those who came seeking judgment. The head counselor was a Vryn named Kelthros. His species looked almost insect-like, with smooth gray skin and large black eyes. He spoke in the common trade language, and his voice carried through the chamber with artificial amplification. We have reviewed the human petition to reduce or eliminate the debt owed to the Vryn Combine, Kelthros began. We have examined the evidence presented by the human delegation. We have considered the economic circumstances of the species known as humanity. Jake felt his fists clench. He knew what was coming. The Council finds no grounds to reduce the debt, Kelthros continued. The rescue operation was conducted in good faith, and the costs were legitimate. Humanity has 10 standard years to repay the full amount of 30 billion credits, plus interest. Failure to do so will result in the seizure of Earth and all human-controlled territories, as per Council law. The words hit like a physical blow. Around the chamber, alien delegates murmured among themselves. Some seemed sympathetic, but most appeared indifferent. To them, this was just another business matter, another enforcement of the rules that kept their civilization functioning. Jake stood and requested permission to speak. Kelthros granted it with a dismissive wave. The amount is impossible to pay, Jake said, his voice steady despite his anger. You know this. The Vryn know this. This is not about debt. This is about taking our worlds. Kelthros's expression did not change. The Council does not concern itself with difficulty, only with law. You have 10 years, Captain Morrison. I suggest you use them wisely. The session ended, and Jake walked out of the chamber, feeling the weight of billions of people on his shoulders. Amy walked beside him, silent but supportive. They made their way back to their quarters, where the rest of Jake's team was waiting. Dan Brooks sat cleaning his rifle, even though weapons were technically prohibited on Unity Station. He was a sergeant, a combat veteran with scars on his face and arms that told stories of battles fought in the outer colonies. He looked up as Jake entered. Well? Dan asked. We have 10 years to do the impossible, Jake replied. The fourth member of their team, Dr. Lisa Grant, looked up from her data tablet. She was a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life forms and understood how different species functioned. Her red hair was tied back, and her green eyes showed quick intelligence. I have been reviewing something interesting, Lisa said. During our time here, I have been scanning the Council's public databases. They have records of resource deposits across the galaxy, including regions they classify as dead zones. Dead zones? Amy asked. Regions of space that are too dangerous for most species to enter, Lisa explained. Places with extreme radiation, crushing gravity, violent stellar activity. The Council has mapped these areas but declared them off-limits because the cost of extraction would exceed the value of the resources. Jake felt something stir in his chest. Hope. Maybe. Or perhaps just the recognition of an opportunity. But humans are different, Jake said slowly. We come from Earth. Lisa nodded. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. Only 0.03% of known planets have conditions as hostile as Earth. High gravity, intense radiation from the sun, extreme weather, aggressive predators, toxic atmosphere. During certain geological periods, humans evolved to survive conditions that would kill most Council species in minutes. Dan set down his rifle, interested now. So these dead zones that they cannot touch, we might be able to work them? More than that, Lisa said, her excitement growing. I ran calculations based on human physiological tolerances. We could operate in environments that even protected council workers cannot access. The resources in just one of these zones could be worth billions. Jake felt the plan forming in his mind. It was dangerous, maybe suicidal, but it was a chance. Humanity had always been good at taking chances. We need a ship, Jake said. Something tough, built for the Ironclad, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Charybdis cluster, and every sensor on the ship immediately started screaming warnings. Jake stared at the view screen, watching 3 massive blue stars orbit each other in a deadly ballet. Radiation washed across space in visible waves, and gravitational distortions rippled through the void like water. Radiation levels are at 42,000 rads and climbing, Lisa reported from her station. We are still at a safe distance, but once we enter the cluster proper, exposure will triple. Gravitational shear detected, Amy added, her fingers dancing across her controls. The stars are pulling at each other, creating zones where space itself is being torn apart. The safe corridor I calculated is holding, but we only have a 6-hour window before the orbital pattern shifts. Greg studied his tactical display, watching the swirling chaos ahead. I am detecting debris fields throughout the cluster. Wreckage from previous expeditions. Looks like at least 4 different ship types, all torn apart. Comforting, Dan muttered from his position near the mining equipment bay. Jake leaned forward in his chair. Amy? How confident are you in your navigation? The math is solid, she replied, but we are about to trust our lives to calculations based on sensor readings from outside the cluster. Once we are inside, conditions might be different than predicted. Then we will adapt, Jake said. Take us in, slow and steady. Follow your plotted course, exactly. The Ironclad moved forward, entering the outer edge of the Charybdis cluster. The ship's shields flared to life as radiation hammered against them. The hull groaned as gravitational forces pulled at the vessel from multiple directions. Amy sat rigid at her station, making tiny corrections to their course as she followed the path she had calculated. Shields holding at 87%, Greg announced. Hull stress is within acceptable parameters. They pushed deeper into the cluster, navigating between zones of lethal radiation and crushing gravity. Several times, Amy had to execute sudden course changes to avoid gravitational anomalies that appeared without warning. Jake watched the sensor displays, seeing how close they came to disaster with each passing minute. After 2 hours of careful navigation, they reached the asteroid field. Thousands of rocks tumbled through space, each one rich with valuable metals. The asteroids glowed faintly from the radiation bombardment, and ice on their surfaces had melted and refrozen countless times, creating strange crystalline formations. Target acquired, Amy said, highlighting a large asteroid on the main display. That one shows the highest concentration of iridium and platinum. Estimated value at current market rates is approximately 200 million credits. Dan. Suit up, Jake ordered. Let us see if humans can really work in hell. Dan grinned and headed to the airlock. He returned minutes later in a heavy environmental suit. The kind designed for the worst conditions space could offer: triple-layered radiation shielding, reinforced joints to handle extreme pressure differences, and enough oxygen for 8 hours of work. Looking good, Dan said over the suit radio. Ready to become the most expensive miner in history. The Ironclad maneuvered close to the target asteroid, and Dan exited through the airlock with 2 other crew members similarly suited. They carried cutting tools, explosive charges, and collection containers. Jake watched through external cameras as they landed on the asteroid's surface and began their work. Radiation exposure increasing, Lisa reported, monitoring Dan's suit readings. But well within safe limits. The suit is performing exactly as designed. Dan worked methodically, using a plasma cutter to slice through the asteroid's outer layer. The rock was dense, compressed by billions of years of gravity and radiation. But the tools cut through it steadily. After 30 minutes, Dan placed shaped charges in strategic locations and moved to a safe distance. "Fire in the hole," Dan announced. The charges detonated silently in the vacuum, cracking the asteroid open like an egg. The interior sparkled with metallic deposits, veins of pure iridium and platinum running through the rock. Dan and his team moved in with collection equipment, loading chunks of valuable ore into containers. While they worked, Lisa launched several probes to collect samples from the ice formations she had detected. The probes returned with containers full of strange organic compounds, complex molecules that had been created by the interaction of radiation and frozen materials. "These are incredible," Lisa said, analyzing the samples. "Some of these compounds have pharmaceutical applications. Others could be used in advanced materials manufacturing. The value could exceed the metals we are mining." Hours passed as they worked. The radiation continued to bombard them, and the gravitational forces tried to tear the ironclad apart. But the ship held. Amy kept them positioned perfectly, compensating for the constant pull of 3 massive stars. Greg monitored their surroundings, watching for any threats or unexpected dangers. Finally, after 5 hours of intense work, Dan and his team returned to the ship with their cargo. They had extracted nearly 50 tons of ore and collected hundreds of samples of exotic compounds. It was a successful first mission, but they were cutting it close on Amy's time window. "We need to leave now," Amy said urgently. "The stellar alignment is shifting. In 20 minutes, our exit corridor will close, and we will be trapped here until the next cycle." "Get us out," Jake ordered. The ironclad turned and accelerated, following Amy's carefully plotted escape route. The radiation intensified as they moved, and the gravitational shears grew stronger. The ship bucked and shuddered, throwing crew members against their restraints. Warning alarms blared as shield strength dropped to 60%. Then, 50. "Almost there," Amy said through gritted teeth, fighting to keep the ship on course. They broke free of the cluster with minutes to spare, emerging into normal space with shields at 40% and half the external sensors burned out from radiation exposure. But they were alive, and their cargo hold was full of resources worth hundreds of millions of credits. "Damage report," Jake called out. Greg ran through the systems. "Shields need repair, several sensors are fried, and we have minor hull damage in 3 compartments. But nothing critical. The ship can be repaired." Dan removed his helmet, his face showing the exhaustion of 5 hours of intense physical labor in a hostile environment. "That was the hardest I have ever worked. But we did it. We actually did it." Lisa was already analyzing their haul. "Based on preliminary assessment, we extracted approximately 300 million credits worth of materials, and these organic compounds could be worth even more once I complete the analysis." Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had proven the concept. Humans could work in dead zones. They could extract resources that the Council considered impossible to reach. This was just the beginning. "Set course for the nearest trading station," Jake ordered. "We need to sell this cargo and prove to everyone that this can work." The journey to the trading station took 3 days. During that time, word of their success began to spread. The ironclad had entered Charybdis and emerged alive. No Council expedition had ever accomplished that. News networks across human space picked up the story, and even alien media began reporting on the crazy Deathworlders who had survived the unsurvivable. They reached Unity Station, the same place where Jake had received the Council's debt judgment. This time, he walked through the corridors with his head high. They docked at the commercial port and began unloading their cargo. The alien merchants who dealt in rare metals gathered quickly when they heard what the ironclad was carrying. Iridium and platinum from Charybdis, certified by independent analysis. The bidding was fierce, and the final price exceeded even Lisa's optimistic estimates. 340 million credits, transferred directly to Earth's debt account. It was barely 1% of what humanity owed, but it was a start. Jake also found buyers for Lisa's organic compounds. Pharmaceutical companies and materials research firms competed for exclusive rights to the samples. Another 60 million credits added to the total. 400 million credits from a single mission. If they could repeat this success, if they could find more dead zones and extract more resources, maybe they actually had a chance. But their success had not gone unnoticed. As Jake walked through Unity Station after completing the sales, he spotted several Vryn officials watching him with their large, emotionless eyes. They did not approach, did not speak, but their message was clear. They were not happy about humanity's success. That evening, Jake met with his crew in the Ironclad's conference room. They were exhausted but energized by their achievement. "We proved it can be done," Jake said. But this was the easy part. The Vryn will not sit back and watch us pay off the debt. They will try to stop us. "Let them try," Dan said. "We are not afraid of bugs in fancy suits. We should be smart about this," Greg cautioned. "The Vryn have influence throughout the council. They can make our lives difficult through legal means, economic pressure, or even direct action. Which is why we need to move fast," Amy suggested. "Hit multiple dead zones quickly. Build up our credits before they can organize against us." The Ironclad was 3 days into its journey toward the Hellmouth Nebula when the proximity alarm started screaming. Greg was at the tactical station in seconds, his fingers flying across the controls as he identified the threat. 12 contacts dropping out of faster than light, he announced. "Unknown configuration. But they are moving to intercept us. Classification reads as Kryn Syndicate." Jake felt his stomach tighten. The Kryn were mercenaries, hired guns, who sold their services to the highest bidder. They did not operate in this region of space unless someone was paying them very well. "Battle stations," Jake ordered. "Amy, can we outrun them?" Amy checked her navigation display and shook her head. "They are positioned to cut off our escape routes. If we run, they will catch us before we can jump to faster than light. Then we fight," Jake said. "Greg, what are we facing?" Greg studied the tactical readout. 12 frigates, medium class. They outgun us individually, but their ships are built for speed and maneuverability. The Ironclad is tougher, but slower. Dan was already suiting up in combat armor, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "What is the play, Captain?" Jake thought fast. The Ironclad was designed to survive hostile environments, not win fleet battles, but it had advantages the Kryn might not expect. Human ships were built differently than Council vessels, prioritized differently. Where alien ships focused on elegance and efficiency, human engineers focused on redundancy and survival. "Greg, route all non-essential power to shields and weapons," Jake ordered. "Amy, I need you to plot micro-jumps. Short faster than light hops that will throw off their targeting." "Micro-jumps are dangerous," Amy warned. "The calculations have to be perfect, or we could end up inside a planet or a star." "I trust you," Jake said simply. The Kryn ships closed in, forming a loose sphere around the Ironclad. A communication signal came through, and Jake accepted it. A Kryn commander appeared on the view screen, its insectoid face covered in chitinous armor and compound eyes that reflected no emotion. "Human vessel," the Kryn said, in accented trade language. "You will surrender your cargo and your ship. Resistance will result in your destruction." "Who is paying you?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "That information is not relevant to your survival," the Kryn replied. "You have 60 seconds to comply." Jake cut the communication. "Greg, target their lead ship. Show them what human weapons can do." The Ironclad's main railgun fired, sending a solid projectile across space at incredible velocity. The Kryn ship tried to dodge, but it was too slow. The projectile punched through its shields and tore into the hull, decompressing 3 compartments and crippling the ship's engines. The remaining Kryn vessels opened fire immediately. Energy beams and missiles converged on the Ironclad from all directions. The shields flared bright blue as they absorbed the impacts, and the ship shuddered from the assault. "Shields at 70%, Greg reported. "They are concentrating fire on our port side." "Amy, execute micro-jump," Jake ordered. "Get us out of their firing solution." Amy's fingers danced across her controls, and reality bent around the ironclad. The ship vanished from one position and reappeared 3,000 kilometers away, throwing off the Kryn targeting completely. Before they could reacquire their target, the ironclad fired again, this time hitting a Kryn frigate broadside and splitting it in half. 2 down, Dan said with satisfaction. 10 to go. But the Kryn were adapting. They spread out, approaching from multiple vectors to prevent another micro-jump escape. Their weapons fire became more coordinated, hammering the ironclad's shields from all sides. Warning alarms blared as shield strength dropped below 50%. "We cannot take much more of this," Greg said. "If the shields fail, our armor will hold for maybe 2 minutes before they punch through." Jake watched the tactical display, looking for any advantage. The Kryn ships were faster and more maneuverable, but they were also lighter. Their shields were designed to deflect energy weapons, not physical impacts. "Amy, can you plot a course through their formation?" Jake asked. "Through them?" Amy's eyes widened. "You want to ram them?" "Not ram. Use them as obstacles." These ships were built to survive asteroid fields and gravitational shears. "Let us see how well Kryn ships handle a close encounter with a Deathworlder vessel." Amy worked furiously, calculating trajectories and velocities. "Do it," Jake ordered. The ironclad accelerated suddenly, driving straight toward the nearest group of Kryn ships. The mercenaries scattered, trying to avoid collision, but the ironclad was already moving too fast. It passed within meters of 2 frigates, and the wash from its shields disrupted their systems. One Kryn ship lost control and tumbled away, its stabilizers fried. The other tried to fire but hit its own ally instead. Greg took advantage of the confusion, firing the railgun at point-blank range. Another Kryn ship exploded, in a ball of superheated gas and debris. 3 more down, Dan counted. 7 remaining, but the victory came at a cost. One of the Kryn ships had managed to land a solid hit on the ironclad's rear section, penetrating the shields and scorching the armor. Warning lights flashed across the engineering station. "Hull breach in Compartment 7, Lisa reported. "Sealing emergency bulkheads. No casualties, but we lost some maneuvering thrusters." The battle continued for another 20 minutes, a brutal, close-range fight between human determination and Kryn professionalism. The ironclad took hit after hit, its armor scarred and scorched, but it kept fighting. Greg coordinated the weapon's fire with deadly precision, while Amy performed micro-jumps that seemed impossible, appearing and disappearing across the battlefield like a ghost. Finally, the Kryn had enough. They had lost 8 ships, and the remaining 4 were damaged. The human vessel, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, had fought them to a standstill. The mercenary commander sent one final transmission. "This contract is not worth our lives. We withdraw." The surviving Kryn ships disengaged and jumped to faster than light, fleeing the battle. Jake slumped in his chair, exhausted. Around him, the crew let out sighs of relief. "Damage report," Jake said. Greg compiled the information. "Shields are at 20% and recharging slowly. We have hull damage in 4 compartments, lost 6 of our secondary thrusters, and 3 weapon systems are offline. But the main systems are functional. We can make repairs. Any casualties? Minor injuries only," Lisa confirmed. "Nothing serious." "Nah." Dan looked at the debris field on the view screen. The wreckage of 8 Kryn ships floating in the void. "We should salvage what we can from those ships." "Kryn, technology sells well." Jake considered it. "Do it. But quickly. Whoever hired them might send reinforcements." Over the next few hours, Dan led salvage teams to the destroyed Kryn vessels. They recovered weapons systems, shield generators, and valuable computer cores. More importantly, they found data logs that confirmed what Jake suspected. The Vryn Combine had hired the Kryn to destroy the ironclad and eliminate the human threat to their debt scheme. "This is evidence of attempted murder," Lisa said, reviewing the logs. "We should present this to the council." "The council will not care," Jake replied bitterly. They will say it is an internal matter, or that we have no proof the Vryn authorized it officially. The system is designed to protect the powerful. Greg agreed. But we can use this another way. If we release this information to the galactic media, it will damage the Vryn's reputation. Other species will see them as willing to kill to maintain their control. Jake nodded. Do it. Send the data logs to every major news network in Council space. Let everyone see what the Vryn really are. While they completed repairs, Jake recorded a message that would be transmitted alongside the data logs. He stood in front of the camera, his uniform scorched from the battle, his face showing exhaustion and determination. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Ironclad. Today, we were attacked by Kryn mercenaries hired by the Vryn Combine. Their orders were to destroy our ship and kill our crew because we dared to work honestly to pay the debt they imposed on humanity. We survived, and we have proof of the Vryn's involvement. This is what we are fighting against. Not just debt, but a system that uses economics as a weapon to enslave species that threaten the established order. Humanity will not submit. We will continue to work, to extract resources from places others fear to go, and we will pay what we owe. But we will also expose the corruption and violence that hides behind the Council's laws. The message went viral across galactic networks within hours. Alien news organizations picked it up, broadcasting footage of the battle and the Vryn data logs. Public opinion began to shift, not just among humans but among other species who had suffered under similar debt arrangements. On Unity Station, the Vryn representatives scrambled to contain the damage. They denied involvement, claiming the Kryn had acted independently. But the evidence was clear, and their denials only made them look more guilty. More importantly, other debtor species began to take notice. The Sulvari, a reptilian race that had been in debt to the Vryn for 8 generations, sent a secret communication to Jake. They wanted to meet, to discuss cooperation. Jake brought his senior crew to a private meeting room on a neutral station. The Sulvari ambassador was named Thessar, a scarred warrior with scales the color of burnished copper. He stood over 7 feet tall, his muscular frame built for high-gravity environments. Captain Morrison, Thessar said in a deep, rumbling voice, your people have shown courage that inspires us. The Sulvari have watched your mission with great interest. What do you want? Jake asked directly. An alliance, Thessar replied. My people evolved on a world with twice Earth's gravity. We can work in environments that even humans find challenging. Together, we could access resources in high-gravity systems and brown dwarf environments that neither species could exploit alone. Lisa leaned forward, intrigued. The brown dwarf in the Typhon system has moons rich with helium-3 and rare Earths, but the gravity well is so deep that getting in and out requires enormous energy. And the radiation is intense. My people can handle the gravity, Thessar said. Yours can handle the radiation. Together, we could mine those moons and share the profits. Enough to pay both our debts and break free from Vryn control. Jake looked at his crew, seeing the same calculation in their eyes. It was. The joint human-Sulvari expedition to the Typhon system was the largest Deathworlder operation in galactic history. The Ironclad traveled alongside 3 Sulvari heavy cruisers, ships built like fortresses to withstand crushing gravity and extreme conditions. Jake stood on the bridge, watching the brown dwarf grow larger on the view screen. Typhon was a failed star. Not quite massive enough to ignite fusion in its core. It glowed with dull red heat, radiating leftover energy from its formation. Around it orbited 7 moons, each one rich with resources but trapped in a gravity well so deep that conventional mining was impossible. Gravity readings are off the scale, Amy reported. The innermost moon is experiencing 4 times Earth's gravity on its surface. The brown dwarf itself is pulling at us even from this distance. Thessar stood beside Jake, his massive frame steady despite the ship's slight trembling from gravitational stress. My people have trained for this environment. We can work on the surface for extended periods without injury. And the radiation? Jake asked. Lisa checked her instruments. High, but manageable with proper shielding. The brown dwarf emits across the spectrum, but nothing the ironclad systems cannot handle. The combined fleet moved carefully into orbit around the largest moon, a rocky body 3 times the size of Earth's moon. Scans showed massive deposits of helium, 3 trapped in subsurface ice deposits, along with rare Earth elements and exotic heavy metals. The estimated value was staggering, over 5 billion credits, if they could extract even a fraction of it. Dan suited up alongside a squad of Sylvari workers. The Sylvari wore minimal environmental protection compared to human suits. Their natural armor and physiology let them survive in conditions that would crush most species. But they still needed oxygen and radiation protection. Ready when you are, Dan said to his Sylvari counterpart, a warrior named Krell. Krell bared his teeth in what might have been a smile. Let us see if humans are as tough as the stories say. The landing craft descended through the moon's thin atmosphere and touched down on the surface. The gravity hit immediately, 4 times what Dan was used to. Even in his powered suit, every movement required effort. He watched as the Sylvari workers moved with relative ease, their dense muscle and bone structure built for exactly this environment. They established a mining camp near a large ice field, where sensors detected high concentrations of helium-3. The Sylvari used heavy equipment to drill into the ice, while humans operated the extraction and processing machinery. It was brutal work, but both species proved capable of handling it. Above them, in orbit, Jake and Thessar coordinated the operation while watching for threats. The Vryn would not ignore this massive operation, and sure enough, on the 3rd day, new contacts appeared on long-range sensors. 15 ships, Greg reported. Configuration matches Vryn Combine military vessels. They are broadcasting a cease and desist order, claiming we are operating illegally in Council-protected space. Thessar growled, a deep sound that rumbled through his chest. Typhon is in unclaimed territory. They have no legal authority here. Since when do the Vryn care about legality? Jake replied. They will try to force us out. The Vryn fleet moved into position, surrounding the mining operation. A communication came through, and Jake accepted it. The Vryn commander appeared on screen, its insectoid face emotionless. You are ordered to cease operations immediately and surrender all extracted materials, the Vryn said. Failure to comply will result in the seizure of your vessels. We are operating in unclaimed space under salvage and extraction rights, Jake replied. You have no authority to interfere. The Council has granted the Vryn Combine emergency powers to secure dangerous materials, the Vryn commander stated. Helium-3 is classified as potentially hazardous, and your extraction methods violate safety protocols. It was nonsense. Legal manipulation designed to justify their interference. But Jake had expected this. He had been preparing for it since they started the mission. If you attempt to interfere with our operations, we will defend ourselves, Jake said calmly. You are outnumbered and outgunned, the Vryn commander replied. Surrender now, and you will be allowed to leave with your lives. Jake cut the communication and turned to Greg. Are we ready? Greg nodded. The Sylvari cruisers are in position, and we have a surprise the Vryn do not know about. Over the past weeks, Jake had been working with Earth's military to develop new weapons systems. Human engineers had studied the weaknesses in Council ship designs, particularly Vryn vessels. They had discovered that Vryn shields were optimized against energy weapons, but vulnerable to physical projectiles at certain frequencies. The ironclad and the Sylvari cruisers had been fitted with advanced railgun systems, weapons that fired solid projectiles at relativistic speeds. Each round carried enough kinetic energy to punch through Vryn shields like they were paper. Target their flagship, Jake ordered. Fire when ready. The ironclad's main railgun discharged, and a projectile crossed the distance to the Vryn flagship in less than a second. The round hit the shield and passed through it, slamming into the hull with devastating force. The flagship's entire forward section crumpled, and secondary explosions tore through the ship. The Sylvari cruisers opened fire simultaneously, their heavier weapons targeting the Vryn battle line. 3 more Vryn ships took critical damage in the first volley, their shields offering almost no protection against the physical rounds. The Vryn fleet scattered, trying to reform their battle line, but they had expected an easy victory against primitive Deathworlders. Instead, they faced coordinated tactics and weapons designed specifically to counter their advantages. "They are breaking formation," Greg reported. 8 ships are attempting to withdraw. "Let them go," Jake said. "But if any ship tries to attack our mining operation, destroy it." The battle continued for another hour. The Vryn tried to adapt, angling their shields and using evasive maneuvers to reduce the railguns' effectiveness. But the human and Sylvari gunners were too accurate, and the Vryn technology was not designed for this kind of warfare. By the time the fighting ended, 12 Vryn ships were destroyed or disabled. The remaining 3 fled into faster-than-light, retreating to lick their wounds. The victory was complete, but Jake knew it came at a cost. "We just declared war on the Vryn Combine," Amy said quietly. "No," Jake replied. "We defended ourselves against an illegal military action. There is a difference." "No." But Amy was right in spirit. The Vryn would not forgive this humiliation. They would escalate, bringing more ships, more weapons, and more pressure to bear. The conflict was just beginning. Down on the moon's surface, Dan and Krell had watched the battle through their suit cameras. When it ended, Krell slapped Dan on the shoulder with enough force to stagger him even in the heavy gravity. "Your people fight well," Krell said. "The Sylvari chose good allies." "Your people are not bad either," Dan replied. "Now let us finish this mining operation before more Vryn show up." They worked for another 2 weeks, extracting helium-3 and rare materials under the brown dwarf's dim light. The combined human-Sylvari operation proved incredibly efficient. Sylvari strength and endurance paired with human technical expertise created a synergy that exceeded what either species could accomplish alone. When they finally departed Typhon, their cargo holds were full. The extracted materials were worth over 6 billion credits at current market rates. Split between humanity and the Sylvari, it represented a massive payment against both species' debts. But the success had broader implications. News of the operation spread across the galaxy, and other debtor species began to take notice. If humans and Sylvari could cooperate to access previously unreachable resources, what could other combinations accomplish? The Vryn had built their power on keeping debtor species isolated and helpless. Now that structure was crumbling, and they knew it. Jake returned to Unity Station with Thessar to sell their cargo and make their debt payments. The market reception was enthusiastic, buyers competing fiercely for the rare materials. The final sale brought in 6.2 billion credits, slightly more than projected. As they transferred the funds, Jake noticed something interesting in the galactic financial networks. Other debtor species were beginning to organize. The Kolhari, who had been in debt for 12 generations, announced plans to explore dead zones in their region of space. The Thren Collective, another long-suffering debtor species, formed a mining cooperative to share resources and expertise. The Vryn's economic empire was facing its first real challenge in centuries. That evening, Jake met with Thessar in a quiet bar on Unity Station. The Sylvari warrior raised a glass of strong alcohol in toast. "To Deathworlders," Thessar said. "May we always remember that strength comes from adversity." Jake raised his own glass. "And may those who tried to enslave us always remember the cost of underestimating survivors." They drank, and Jake felt a sense of cautious optimism. Humanity had paid off nearly 8 billion credits of its debt now. The Sylvari had made similar progress. Both species were on track to achieve freedom within the original 10-year deadline. But Jake knew the real fight was just beginning. The Vryn would not accept defeat quietly. They would use every tool at their disposal, legal and illegal, to maintain their control. And if economic and military pressure failed, they would try something more desperate. The next day, Jake received a communication from Director Stevens on Earth. The message was brief, but alarming. Captain Morrison, the Galactic Council has called an emergency session. The Vryn are pushing for new regulations, specifically targeting Deathworlder resource extraction. They are calling it the Hazardous Operations Safety Act. But the real purpose is to shut down your operations through legal means. They want to impose fees, permits, and restrictions that will make dead zone mining economically impossible. The vote is scheduled in 2 weeks. If it passes, everything you have accomplished will be undone. Jake stared at the message, feeling anger burn in. Jake stood before the Galactic Council chamber, but this time, he was not alone. Behind him stood Thessar and representatives from 6 other debtor species who had begun their own Deathworld resource extraction operations. The chamber was packed with delegates from across the galaxy, all waiting to see if the Vryn would succeed in crushing this rebellion before it could spread further. The Vryn representative, Administrator Kelthros, presented his case with cold precision. He displayed images of the battle at Typhon, claiming it proved that Deathworlder operations were inherently violent and destabilizing. He showed charts suggesting that unregulated dead zone mining could damage delicate stellar environments. He argued that the proposed Hazardous Operations Safety Act was necessary to protect the galaxy from reckless exploitation. It was all lies wrapped in enough truth to sound reasonable. Jake watched the council members listening, seeing some nod in agreement. The Vryn had spent weeks building support, calling in favors, and making promises. They might actually have the votes to pass this legislation. When Kelthros finished, the head counselor acknowledged Jake. The human delegation may present its response. Jake stepped forward, carrying a data chip. Counselors, I am not a politician or a lawyer. I am a ship captain who has been trying to pay an honest debt, but I have learned something over these past months. The Vryn do not want their debt paid. They want permanent control. He activated the data chip, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber. This is evidence we recovered from Kryn mercenary ships that attacked us. It shows direct payment from Vryn accounts, along with orders to destroy human vessels and kill our crews. This is not economic competition. This is attempted murder. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Kelthros remained calm. Those were unauthorized actions by rogue elements. The Vryn Combine has already disavowed those responsible. Really? Jake pulled up more data. Because these records show a pattern of similar actions going back 50 years. The Kolhari mining expedition that disappeared in the Vortex cluster. The Thren survey team that was destroyed near the Cinder Worlds. Even the accident that damaged the Frontier Dawn and created humanity's debt in the first place. All of them have links to Vryn financial transactions and suspicious timing. The murmurs grew louder. Several council members leaned forward, interested now. This is speculation and conspiracy theory, Kelthros said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Lisa Grant stepped forward, her tablet displaying complex financial analysis. It is not speculation when you follow the money. The Vryn Combine has built an empire on debt slavery. They identify species with valuable resources, create situations that force those species into debt, then use legal mechanisms to maintain permanent economic control. The debts are designed to be unpayable through normal means. Thessar spoke next, his deep voice carrying authority. The Sulvari have been in debt to the Vryn for 8 generations. We have made payments totaling 3 times the original amount borrowed. Yet our debt continues to grow due to interest, fees, and penalties. This is not economics. This is slavery with paperwork. Representatives from other debtor species added their voices, each sharing similar stories. The pattern was undeniable. Once laid out clearly, the Vryn had been running this scheme for centuries, and the Council had either been complicit or willfully blind. The Hazardous Operations Safety Act is not about safety, Jake continued. It is about shutting down the one method debtor species have found to escape the trap. The Vryn are afraid because for the first time, their victims are fighting back successfully. They want you to vote away our freedom because we are proving that their system is based on exploitation, not economic necessity. The head counselor raised a hand for silence. These are serious accusations, Captain Morrison. Do you have proof that the Vryn deliberately created the circumstances leading to your death? 1. Nay. Jake hesitated. They had strong circumstantial evidence but no smoking gun proving the Vryn had sabotaged the Frontier Dawn. He was about to admit this when Amy stepped forward. We do, Amy said quietly. She activated her own data display, showing technical schematics. 3 days ago, I completed an analysis of the Frontier Dawn's engine failure. The official investigation concluded it was a random malfunction. But when I examined the recovered components, I found evidence of deliberate tampering. Specifically, a micro-explosive device was attached to a critical fuel regulator. The device was manufactured by a company owned by a Vryn subsidiary. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Kelthros stood abruptly. This is fabrication. Where is your evidence? In secure storage on Unity Station, Amy replied. Available for independent analysis by any qualified expert you choose. The explosive residue has a unique chemical signature that can be traced to its manufacturer. And the timing device has a serial number that leads directly to the Vryn supply chain. Jake stared at Amy. She had not shared this discovery with him before now, probably to protect the information until the critical moment. It was brilliant strategy. The head counselor called for order, pounding a gavel that echoed through the chamber. This council will review the evidence presented. The vote on the Hazardous Operations Safety Act is postponed, pending investigation. This session is adjourned. As the delegates filed out, Kelthros approached Jake with barely contained fury. You have made a powerful enemy today, human. You made yourself my enemy when you tried to enslave my species, Jake replied. We are just defending ourselves. Over the next week, independent investigators examined Amy's evidence. The results confirmed her analysis. The Frontier Dawn had been sabotaged, and the trail led directly to Vryn operatives. The scandal exploded across galactic media, and public opinion turned sharply against the Vryn Combine. But the Vryn were not finished. If they could not win through legal means, they would try military force. A massive Vryn fleet gathered at their home system, preparing for what could only be a military operation. Intelligence reports suggested they were planning to blockade Earth and the other Deathworlder home systems, forcing compliance through economic strangulation. Jake received an urgent summons from Earth's Defense Command. He took the ironclad home, arriving in orbit to find Earth's fleet mobilizing. Ships were being pulled from every station and outpost. Crews recalled from leave. Weapons and supplies being loaded frantically. Admiral Helen Carter met with Jake in the Orbital Command Center. She was a veteran of the Proxima Rebellion, a hard woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. The Vryn are coming, Carter said without preamble. Intelligence suggests a fleet of at least 40 ships, maybe more. They will try to blockade our system and force us to surrender all assets. Can we stop them? Jake asked. In open space, probably not, Carter admitted. Their ships are individually superior to ours. But we are not fighting in open space. We are fighting here, in our home system, where we know every asteroid and orbital trajectory. She pulled up a tactical map showing Earth's solar system. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. That is where we will make our stand. Greg Harper has been working with our tactical teams to develop a defensive strategy that uses our advantages. Jake found Greg in the Tactical Planning Center, surrounded by holographic displays showing ship positions and projected battle scenarios. Greg looked up as Jake entered. Good, you are here, Greg said. I need your input on something. He showed Jake the plan. It was audacious, using the asteroids themselves as weapons and defensive positions. Human ships would hide among the rocks, using their superior maneuverability in debris fields to offset the Vryn's technological advantages. They would attach engines to large asteroids and use them as projectiles. They would fight in the radiation shadow of Jupiter, where human shielding would hold, and Vryn systems would fail. "It is risky," Greg said, "but it gives us a chance." "When do they arrive?" Jake asked. 2 days, Greg replied. "We have 2 days to position every ship, rig every asteroid, and prepare for the biggest battle in human history." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Dan led teams attaching improvised engines to asteroids, turning them into massive kinetic weapons. Lisa worked with medical teams, preparing for casualties. Amy coordinated with navigation officers across the fleet, sharing tactical jump coordinates that would let human ships appear and disappear throughout the battlefield. Thessar arrived with a silvery battle group, 3 heavy cruisers and 12 frigates. Other Deader species sent what ships they could spare. The combined Deathworlder fleet numbered 87 vessels against the Vryn's projected 40 or more. But numbers did not tell the whole story. The Deathworlders were fighting for their freedom, for their homes, for everything they had worked to achieve. The Vryn fleet arrived exactly when intelligence predicted, dropping out of faster than light at the edge of the solar system. 42 ships, led by the massive battle cruiser, Sovereign Will. The fleet advanced toward Earth, confident in their superiority. Admiral Carter addressed the combined fleet. "All ships, this is Carter. Today we fight for more than just humanity. We fight for every species that has been enslaved by debt, controlled by laws designed to keep them helpless. The Vryn think we are primitives, who will break before their military might. Let us show them what Deathworlders can do. All ships, battle stations. Execute defensive plan, Harper." The human fleet was invisible, hidden among the asteroids, and using Jupiter's powerful magnetosphere to mask their signatures. As the Vryn advanced into the belt, they had no idea they were entering a carefully prepared kill zone. Greg gave the signal, and the battle began. Asteroids with attached engines fired up, accelerating toward the Vryn formation at incredible speeds. The Vryn tried to shoot them down, but there were too many, coming from too many directions. 3 asteroids hit Vryn ships directly, the kinetic impacts devastating their shields and hulls. Human ships appeared from hiding, firing railguns at close range before disappearing back into the asteroid field. The Vryn tried to pursue but found themselves fighting in an environment humans had trained for. Ships crashed into asteroids they had not detected, or were torn apart by gravitational eddies they had not anticipated. The battle raged for hours. Dan led boarding parties that captured Vryn vessels, while Lisa coordinated medical teams, treating wounded across the fleet. Amy's navigation allowed human ships to appear anywhere on the battlefield, striking and vanishing like ghosts. The Solveri heavy cruisers proved devastating, their weapons designed for close-range pounding matches. They waded into the Vryn formation, absorbing damage that would destroy lighter ships and dealing it back with interest. When the Vryn flagship Sovereign Will tried to break through toward Earth, it found itself facing the ironclad and a coordinated strike from human and Solvari vessels. The battle was brutal, but the flagship's shields eventually failed. Jake opened a communication channel. "Vryn fleet, this is Captain Morrison. Your flagship is disabled. Your battle line is broken. You have lost. Withdraw now, and we will allow your damaged ships to leave. Continue fighting, and we will destroy you all." There was a long pause. Then the Vryn fleet commander accepted reality. The surviving Vryn ships, less than half their original number, withdrew from the system. As the enemy fled, the human fleet erupted in cheers. They had won. Earth was safe. The Deathworlders had defeated the most powerful economic empire in the galaxy. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. The Council would have to respond to the Vryn's defeat. Laws would change. Power structures would shift. The age of debt slavery was ending, and a new era was beginning. He looked out at Earth, that beautiful blue and white sphere that had forged humanity in fire and pressure. The death world that had created a species tough enough to survive anything the galaxy could throw at them. The debt was not fully paid in credits, but it had been settled in flames across star systems, in courage and determination and the refusal to accept slavery. Humanity and its Deathworlder allies had purchased something more valuable than economic freedom. They had bought the right to stand equal among the stars, and no one would ever take that away again. His chest. The Vryn were trying to change the rules, because they were losing the game. It was exactly the kind of manipulation he had expected, but that did not make it less dangerous. He called a meeting with his crew and Thessar. They gathered in the Ironclad's conference room, faces grim as they reviewed the proposed legislation. "This is economic warfare," Lisa said. "The fees alone would consume 90% of our profits, and the permit process would take years, with no guarantee of approval." "Can we fight it legally?" Amy asked. Greg shook his head. "The council makes its own rules. If enough members vote for this, it becomes law, and we have to comply or be declared outlaws." Thessar's claws scraped against the table. "My people have lived under Vryn laws for 8 generations. We know how they manipulate the system. They will use fear, promises, and threats to secure the votes they need." Jake leaned back in his chair, thinking. They had 2 weeks to stop this legislation, or find a way around it. 2 weeks to save everything they had fought for. "Then we need to change the council's mind," Jake said. "We need to show them that supporting the Vryn is more dangerous than supporting us. Risky to trust another species, especially one they barely knew. But the potential rewards were enormous." "What percentage split are you proposing?" Jake asked. "Equal," Thessar said. "We contribute our strength. You contribute your technology and radiation resistance. We share the costs and the profits 50-50. It was a fair offer, maybe too fair. But Thessar's eyes showed the same desperation Jake felt. The Sulvari were trapped, just like humanity, and they saw a chance to escape. "We have a deal," Jake said, extending his hand. Thessar gripped it with his powerful claw, careful not to crush human bones. "Then let us show the galaxy what Deathworlders can accomplish when we work together." Lisa nodded. "I have been reviewing the data Director Stevens gave us. There are at least 20 dead zones within reasonable travel distance. Each one has resources worth billions. If we can tap even a fraction of that, we can pay the debt and secure humanity's freedom." Jake looked at the data, at the opportunities spread across the galaxy. It was dangerous work, the kind that would kill most people. But humans were not most people. They were the descendants of survivors, of people who had clawed their way to the top of Earth's brutal food chain. "Then we keep going," Jake decided. "We will visit every dead zone we can reach. We will extract every credit worth of resources, and we will show the Council that humanity will not be enslaved." The crew agreed, and they began planning their next mission. But as they worked, none of them knew that their success had set in motion events that would shake the entire Galactic Council. The Vryn were already planning their response, and it would be violent. Worst conditions space can throw at it. And we need a crew willing to go places that scare even the bravest alien explorers. Amy smiled. The first real smile Jake had seen in days. "I can plot a course through anything, even a dead zone." Dan picked up his rifle again. "And I can handle whatever we find when we get there." Lisa nodded. "I will prepare environmental studies and safety protocols." Jake looked at his team. These 3 people who had followed him through every challenge, every mission, every impossible situation. They were about to attempt something that the entire Galactic Council considered insane. They were going to pay off humanity's debt by going where no other species dared to go. "Then, let us go home and build our ship," Jake said. "We have work to do." The Galactic Council thought they had trapped humanity. They thought the debt would break Earth's spirit and force humans into submission. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated what Deathworlders could do when their survival was on the line. The real game was just beginning, for the worst conditions space can throw at it. And we need a crew willing to go places that scare even the bravest alien explorers. Plius. And Plius. Amy smiled. The first real smile Jake had seen in days. I can plot a course through anything, even a dead zone. That. Dan picked up his rifle again. And I can handle whatever we find when we get there. Lisa nodded. I will prepare environmental studies and safety protocols. Jake looked at his team. These 3 people who had followed him through every challenge, every mission, every impossible situation. They were about to attempt something that the entire Galactic Council considered insane. They were going to pay off humanity's debt by going where no other species dared to go. Then let us go home and build our ship, Jake said. We have work to do. The Galactic Council thought they had trapped humanity. They thought the debt would break Earth's spirit and force humans into submission. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated what Deathworlders could do when their survival was on the line. The real game was just beginning.